Welcome, everyone. I am Bob Wurzelbacher, the director of the Respect Life Office for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and this is our video podcast series that we call Being Pro-Life. Each month, we'll discuss a different topic in the Respect Life arena. We'll hear a personal story from someone deeply affected by that issue. And finally, we'll share ways that you can get involved. This month's topic is prison ministry. This month, we have several guests. Will you please introduce yourselves?
Hi, my name is Marty Arlinghouse. I'm the Director of Prison Ministry for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati.
I'm Tessie Castillo, and I'm a criminal justice writer and the co-author of Crimson Letters, Voices from Death Row.
My name's Lyle May, and I have been on death row since March 1999. I've been incarcerated since July 10th, 1997. I'm 19 years old. Now I'm 42. I'm a writer. I've been engaged in correspondence program through Ohio University for the last decade or so, and have been doing my best to create proximity between the public and the people it incarcerates through my writing and public speaking.
I'm glad to be here. This is Wilson Willard, the Executive Director of the Help Program Cincinnati, the Returning Citizen Program that's funded by CCHD and St. Francis de Sales Parish.
Marty, let's start with you. So how did you get involved in prison ministry?
Going back into high school, at my home parish growing up in Cleveland, my pastor was a death row minister, and he actually successfully brought the case of Joe D'Ambrosio for the courts and proved his innocence. I was the evening receptionist at the parish, and whenever Joe called from death row to try to get Father Neil on the line, I was the one who had to transfer him wherever Father Neil was.
Yeah, I talked with Joe and Father Neil. We have that video posted on our website, or he's on the podcast, of course, from July of 2019. Or our listeners don't know, you can look that up. Joe was a man who was condemned to death, who sat on death row for 24 years, I think it was. His case was dismissed. Fascinating story.
Then when he finally was released, it was actually Christmas Eve Mass, and Father Neil comes up to me before Mass, and he walks me over to this guy sitting in the pew, and he says, "Marty, Joe, Marty." The fact that I had someone regularly just sharing with the parish about guys who are on death row, people who we think are monsters, that people just like us, they feel the same thing as us. They go through suffering just like us. And especially having that small role in that whole drama with Joe just gave me a heart for it. So when Father McQuillan said, "Hey, do you want to come to the prisons?" I thought, oh yeah, sure, why not? So I had a really good guy that I was able to sing with, but he was one of the first ones that I was like, wow, this is a guy that at some point I know he made a big mistake. I don't know what it was, but just being with him here tells me there's something far greater in him being a human being than we would want to judge him as just because of what he's done in the past. That was my introduction to it. I got involved fairly regularly, and then 2 years ago, Christine, my predecessor, called me up and said, "Hey, what do you think of taking this over?" And that's how it all got to this point where I'm now the director.
So Marty, being pro-life, human dignity applies to all people, including the guilty. So how have you seen that dignity applied in your work in prison ministry?
My team and I, we're witnesses on the inside to the value of every human life. Everyone else sees them for what they've done. We see them for who they are, or at least who they can be. It really, I think, speaks to that deep connection that prison ministry has with the pro-life movement. And we can look past what a person's done and see the person that God's created so that we can bring it out in them. That's why our ministry has such power.
Share one of those stories of someone who was converted to love of Christ while they were in prison.
My volunteer, Steve, he has this little prayer journal that he gives to the guys, and he just go around the circle and they just write whatever prayer intentions that the guys have in there. So he asked this guy, "Well, how'd your week go?" He's like, "Oh, well, it's okay. My cell caught on fire, but they didn't catch me." And he's like, wait, they didn't catch you? Like, wouldn't you want them to know your cell was on fire? And finally, another guy says, "He's an arsonist, Steve. He set it on fire." He was still setting his cell on fire. They figured out how to start a fire with a couple of batteries. The next week he comes back in. Steve asks, "Well, any more fires in your cell?" "No, not this week." He goes, "Are you having a change of heart?" He goes, "No, just a lack of accelerants."
Oh my goodness.
But as the weeks went on, what Steve was noticing as this guy was writing in the prayer journal, he was saying, "Please pray for the eternal soul of Ted Bundy. Please pray for the eternal soul of Osama bin Laden." he's praying for the worst of the worst. He was noticing this guy's really starting to think about these things and realizing the need for mercy. He got into RCIA, came into the church. He chose the name Ignatius. Ignatius means the fiery one, so it's pretty fitting. And now he's been practicing the faith for a year now.
So he no longer wants to set his prison on fire.
No, but he still really loves when we light those candles for Mass.
All right, so Tessie, what's your experience with prisoners on death row, and what do you know about this topic?
In 2014, I was asked to come into Central Prison, which is where all of the death row prisoners in North Carolina are housed, to teach a writing class to men on death row. And I taught that class for several months. And I really got to know the guys, got to learn about their backgrounds and how they got there and who they are. And after a few months, I decided to write a letter to the local newspaper talking about these men and the human side of them. And after that letter was published, I was dismissed from the prison. I'm not allowed to teach anymore. So after that, I got together with some of my former students and we wrote a book so that they could tell their stories.
Why don't we start with the presumption most people have probably about capital punishment, right? Which is that it's reserved for people who have committed some pretty grisly murders or some pretty awful crimes. But you've learned that this is not necessarily the case.
So last year in the US, there were 16,000 murders, but there were only 34 people in the whole country who were sentenced to death. And while it's true that a lot of those 34 who were sentenced have been convicted of really particularly terrible murders, it's also true that many of them were not. And in fact, many people convicted of the death penalty were not actually convicted of killing anyone at all. The felony murder rule states that if a murder is committed during the course of a felony, which in most cases is a robbery, then everyone involved in that robbery, they're all equally culpable. So one of the people in my class, for example, he was involved in a gas station robbery. There were 4 men present in that robbery. 2 of them went into the gas station. One of them had a loaded gun. The 2 others, including the student in my class, were outside, and he was the getaway driver. They did not intend to kill anyone. They just wanted money. But something happened inside the gas station, and the person with the gun killed the gas station attendant. And the outcome of that was that my student, who was the getaway driver, was given the death penalty. And the other 3 men, including the one with the gun who had actually committed the murder, did not.
The same case, the getaway driver is the only one convicted of death. How does that even happen?
It depends a lot on the lawyer. All 4 men had different lawyers, and the lawyers gave different defenses. In the case of the actual shooter, the defense was mental health, and so he was able to escape the death penalty while my student was not.
So you wrote a book, you co-authored with 4, not only inmates, but people who are on death row. What was your purpose in writing, your primary purpose in writing this book?
It concerns me that as a society, we have a punishment that's so severe and we don't realize who we're applying it to. We have this very one-sided image of people on death row as monsters, as incapable of redemption. And then they get locked away and they're there for 30 years, usually, before they're executed, if they're executed. And we don't know anything about them or who they are or how they may have changed while they're in prison in those 30 years. So it was important to me that the public hear the actual stories and voices of the men inside. To be honest, I was really nervous when I was writing this book and releasing this book. It was a long process. They obviously don't have email or anything like that. So they would send me essays and I would make some suggestions and send them back, and they would correct them and send them back to me. And it happened over many years. It was not a kumbaya process, but we did it and we're excited about it to have it now. And I'm really glad that I have, because I've already had a lot of people reach out and say how moved they were by the book and by the men and by their stories. And that gives me a lot of strength.
So I've read that book myself, Crimson Letters, Voices from Death Row by Tessie Castillo, Castillo. I highly recommend that book. Okay, Lyle, well, do you want to share a little bit about your childhood?
My family was Catholic. My mom taught CCD classes, and we went every Sunday. Both I and my siblings were all altar servers, and I attended school at least until, I became a teenager, and then I ended up getting involved with the wrong kind of people. I had a lot of drug problems and mental health issues and ended up dropping out of school. And that was probably the first of many, many mistakes that led to where I am now.
So if you could live life again, what do you think you could have done differently?
First and foremost, it would have been completing my high school diploma. From there, it would have been college. I certainly would have completed an undergraduate degree. I feel like I would have gone on law school. I don't think it would have been out of the realm of possibility to have done a little bit of military service, because my dad, he was in the Navy for 21 years, and those were certainly influences in my background. And I felt like those were things that I could have done differently that would have seriously impacted my future and what course it took.
So you said you were raised Catholic and you were even an altar server for a while in your life. How has your faith shaped your experience now on death row?
My faith is something that has taken some major cultivation over time. I was angry when I got to death row, and I think with good reason. And it took a very profound moment of self-searching to really say, my past is exactly that now, and I have this opportunity to just shake myself and get up and walk to meet whatever God put in my path. And the mentors that I'd been looking for in school appeared on death row, of all places. And the first one was a guy, Father Dan, who used both the prodigal son and Pascal's wager to kind of really get me back into Catholicism. And there were also maybe 3 or 4 guys who were ultimately executed that helped me grow in my faith. As I was able to grow into my faith, I took a more active interest in Catholic Mass on Thursdays, asking questions and really wanting to know more, not just about the afterlife, but how everyday life is lived, because I hadn't ever lived before. That was part of my whole problem on the street. And I didn't know what it meant to live. And I had no idea until it had been taken away from me, the type of freedom that you really do have out in the free world. And it doesn't necessarily end because you're confined. There's still a significant amount of freedom to become the person that you should have been from the beginning. And that's maybe the second lesson that I learned. Becoming the man that you're called to be even while you sit on death row. I'm sure that's something that most people don't even think that way. We can still be civilized, that we can still be human beings who have made mistakes, who are certainly flawed. But that doesn't remove this idea that a cage does not make you less of a human being. I read the book, Crimson Letters, that you're a co-author on that book, and you described at least one friend that you lost, all right, who was actually executed while you were there. What is that experience like? It's like losing a family member, because when you're on death row, you're around people all day, every day. You're around them more than you would be a family member. We are each other's lives. So when that person is taken away from you and is put to death, it's hard. It's like losing a piece of yourself, especially if it's somebody that you've grown to know and to love. What would you like to say to people who might have bad assumptions about people who are on death row? It would be to reiterate that we are all more than our worst mistakes. Certainly, murder should be punished as a crime, but there are ways to do that without taking somebody's life and resorting to the old ideas of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. All right, Wilson, let's turn to you. So what is it like to try to re-enter society after spending time incarcerated?
Coming home from prison is a major shock. You have to return to a society that has moved on without you. If you think about all the rapid speed at which society has evolved in terms of cell phones and computers alone, you have to realize that somebody who's been in prison for a long time, and these are guys that didn't learn to type on a typewriter, let alone to use a computer. The first thing we do when someone comes home from prison and starts to talk to us about getting back into the world is find out, do you even have the documents to get started? They have the I-9 process is a lot stricter than it ever used to be. So you have individuals that come home from prison. Nobody put their stuff up before they went away. They don't know what happened to their driver's license, their social security card, their birth certificate. And you need each of those to get the other one. And then if they don't, we refer them to St. Vincent de Paul, who has a reentry program specifically to help people get a birth certificate, which they can then use to get a social security card, which they can then use to go to get a state ID. and then you can get a job. And you have to start getting your transportation together. Transportation costs are an extreme problem for returning citizens. Now you go to this job and they say, great, well, we want you here at 5 a.m. until you realize the buses don't start running till 5:30. Let alone, how do you have the bus fare? It's $1.10 going to one bus. You might have to take two buses or three buses. So Cincinnati is number 22 among cities of its size in terms of the bus access. There are 278,000 jobs, according to studies, that are not accessible by the bus system in this area. And where the jobs are that pay the most in this county, or in this area, I should say, are in Butler County, are down in Kentucky in Florence, are down in Kentucky in Hebron. There's a lot of warehouses in Hebron. Well, that means you have to take two buses in Cincinnati to get downtown, to get on the tank bus to go to Kentucky to get to the job in Hebron. So now it costs you $5 or $6 to get there. You have to be on a really tight schedule of connecting buses. You know the stress of connecting planes. It's the same stress. You have to take this one bus, hope it's on time so you get the next bus. Now you have to take a third bus into Kentucky. And then you get to the workplace. You can't work overtime because you may miss your bus home. Maybe the bus gets you there half an hour before your shift starts, or because of the schedule, you might have to get there 2 hours before your shift starts. So your first 2 weeks of employment, you may need $50 or $60 to get back and forth to work, and you haven't gotten a paycheck yet. And your family's already been taking care of you for 6 weeks while you waited to get all the IDs and paperwork you needed to get started at the job. Plus, if you're on parole or probation, you can't go out of the county or out of the state to work without permission. So what the HELP program does is we concentrate on fixing that transportation problem. We have a 15-passenger van that we run, and they can get to a job that pays a little bit more, so they have a better chance of making the kind of wages that allow them to move forward in life. There are warehouses that are located near downtown Cincinnati. They have average wages of $10 and $11. You can do the same work and make $15 to $17 out in the suburbs. And that $4 an hour translates to $160 a week, $720 a month. That $10,000 over a year makes a big difference. And so that's a very important component of the HELP program. For us, we spend about $2,000 a month on drivers and about $1,500 a month on gas. When we raise money, we ask people, hey, can you just sponsor a month? And we're going to get these people to work. They're going to make higher wages. And we then work with them on a long-term plan to get them off the van and into their own vehicle. We're not an entitlement program. We're an empowerment program.
So people are hearing this. People are like, wow, that sounds like some good work that's going on there. I want to help. So how can people get involved if they want to help you with your reentry program?
We have a webpage that has donation options on the webpage.
There it is, helpprogramcincinnati.net. Go ahead.
Yes, and under Help Us, you can go there and donate, become a volunteer, become a mentor. There's so many options for what you could do to participate. We just need people that are willing to come out and be a part of this and who want to help make changes in the community, meaningful changes.
What are volunteer things that are available?
So many skills are needed. If you happen to be an attorney, we always have guys that have issues that can be helped by an attorney, whether it's child custody or maybe getting dispute with a landlord. We had a volunteer that does financial management because she works at First Financial Bank. So she teaches our financial management class. And then we just have volunteers who come in and help guys with things like filling out job applications on the computer. Please contact me if you have any interest in participating in the program in some way, and we'll be happy to talk you through that process.
All right, well, Marty, last question. We always let people know how they can get involved. If they're listening to this and feel like, oh, wow, I never even thought about that. I kind of feel called to be more involved in prison ministry. How would they do that?
They can email me at marlinghouse, that's at catholiccincinnati.org, and just tell me that you're interested in the prison ministry, and I will follow up with them.
All right, well, thanks for talking with us today about prison ministry. Hopefully we've learned a little bit. We can give more humanity to those who are in prison, see that it is all part of the dignity that we need to give to all human life. Thanks for spending time with us today.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me on.
I thank you for this chance. You guys are able to stay safe during this COVID-19 pandemic and are not getting too stir crazy from the social distancing.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me.
And I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners for tuning in on this episode of our Being Pro-Life series. Head to the website and view all the links talked about in this episode at www.catholiccincinnati.org/being-pro-life. Thank you again for joining us today, and I look forward to being with you next time.